Recently discovered that I can sleep on coffee. I have a caffeine sensitivity, I suppose. If I drink caffeine after 3 p.m., like even just if I were to have a coffee later in the day, I would be awake until 8 a.m. the next morning. Guaranteed. Howdy everybody, this is Hoglan and I'm in Wiesbaden, Germany today playing with Testament on the Bay Strikes Back tour, which also features Exodus and Death Angel.
Usually I ask, what do you love most about drumming? But I've asked this question like 50 times. So let's rephrase that a little bit. What do you think are the most important things a drummer should have or do? And what are the no-goes?
I would say one of the most important things to do when you're on the drums is you just kind of keep yourself in a relaxed state, because sometimes when you're up on stage, the adrenaline's going, and I'm guilty of this, where sometimes your tempos can just get, like super ramped up, and the band comes up to you later and says, man, we were cooking through those couple of songs that we don't, it's challenging to play when they're that fast. So always remain a sense of calm, and then you never panic on stage. And I always try to find this very relaxed state to get into, kind of like a Zen sort of, not quite a trance, because I gotta stay as the conductor of all, but when I'm on stage, I am really playing for myself. I'm not playing for anybody else. I'm playing for the 4 guys that are in front of me, but when it comes to like entertaining or anything like that, that comes secondary. I'm just in my own world. So, a good thing also for drummers is don't be afraid to stretch, don't be afraid to warm up. If I do those stretches, I do not have to warm up a ton, because the stretches that I do, and I've pointed them out, you can find them out online sort of thing. It's a pretty simple stretch, but when you're done with this stretch, you're ready to go. I could go through a litany of things to do. I'm a serial napper before shows. I get a lot of rest. For my touring life, my entire life revolves around the show. That's the most important thing. So I do what I have to do to make that show run as smoothly as possible. And one of those things for me is I take a good sized nap before the show. And that's how I prepare for the show the best. And that's, like I say, the most important thing is doing the show. So that's some of the goes, and the no-goes are, try not to rip your body up too much on tour. Like we've all done it, we've all had our fun, but you want to be taken seriously as a musician. So you're up there as an example to yourself, and you want to present the best example of your talent, or your whatever it is you're doing. You want to be the best at it. So yeah, just try to get your rest. Try not to get engaged in too much of the touring lifestyle, because that can drag you down.
One other thing is, and I'm not really sure how I get rid of that, is when the music gets to me, like I'm driven. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty much getting into beast mode. I don't even want to, it just happens.
Sure.
And then I burn my body, which is absolutely super moronically stupid.
Yeah,
but it happens because it's music and I feel it. And that's something I'm not really sure how to get rid of. Maybe have a mantra or... But you know what I mean, if it's the adrenaline kicks in.
Indeed.
So maybe I play the right tempo, but I'm hitting fucking hard because it's metal, right? So
absolutely.
What are your experiences with what I just said?
Well, actually, yeah, I think that comes down to pacing oneself. You got to get through the 90-minute show or the 45-minute show. You don't want to blow yourself out in the first 10 minutes. So that's where the relaxation comes in. If you know that, if you do find an issue with certain aspects of your playing, you discover those issues and then you work on those. I have the same thing. I'll cook through songs. Testament does not work with a click track live, so it's all up to me, and I'm as guilty as anybody of just you wanting to rip into the songs. I mean, this is aggressive thrash metal you're playing. You want to just, the drummer can play as fast as he wants, and the guitarists are the ones going, dude, that's just too much, like we can't go that fast. So that's my thing, is having to keep it under reins, keep the reins on the tempos, because Testament's early material was pretty quick, and those songs were recorded when they were young and aggro and all that sort of stuff. So I got to keep that in mind, that you want to approach the tempos of the songs, but you don't want to blow past them. And I can blow past tempos from albums real easy. So.
Hoglan said that he is actually preparing for a show with the mindset that he already finished the show and it was great.
Yeah, sure.
And then he is way relaxeder when he starts to play that.
Fair enough. I mean,
I never tried it, but maybe I should.
That could be some kind of pre-paving, like like a visualization, which I've used that in my playing forever. I've used that with my entire career. I didn't even know it was called visualization, but we've all heard the term of visualization, and for me that was always one of those fruity hippie terms, visualization. You see yourself doing it, and then you do it, and you've already seen it being done. And I'm just like, I don't get that. But I never knew it was called visualization, because that is precisely what I have done with my entire career. It's just like I see the end result of what I want to happen, and I just make that happen. And whether it's on the kit or doing the business, I've always got my mind on the final destination, and getting to that destination is always a lot easier than you think. So if you are visualizing the final end, like Yoke did, I see the show as being over, and I did a great show. Whatever it takes to get yourself in that mental state, I back. I've always said that drums are 90% mental, 10% physical. If you got the physicality to do it, if you've got the mentality to write and create, and that's the important part about drumming, then the physical part kind of takes care of itself. You're a drummer. You know your skill range, no matter what it is, and you work within that, and you're always trying to push yourself a little bit harder, a little bit higher level. If you are seeing yourself as I'm gonna give the best, the most, the everything that I've got every night, that is a good self-direction, I'm gonna give it all, I'm gonna put all my talent to use tonight, and all my skills to display my talent, because there's always for every drum thing or musical thing you're seeing somebody do, there is a lot of mentality going into it. For each drummer, it's all individualized. Everybody has their own routines, their own rituals when they're on stage, what they do to keep themselves rocking along. So You know, I could see that happening, absolutely.
Whenever I hear you playing in a band, I always have the feeling that you're one of those artists who elevates the material he's playing with.
Oh, cool, thank you.
And I guess it's by no means really analyzing the thing. It's probably not just a robotic thing. Probably it's just a feeling thing, an emotional thing.
I can see that, yeah.
Probably you're just like, I would approach like this way, and
Sure.
then it already happens. So
there you go.
Are there any differences in how artists try to work with you?
That's a good question. I think like when somebody, like say, contracts me for a session, or they tell me, hey, I've written a bunch of songs with you in mind, they sometimes like really elevate everything. They're like, oh, Hoglan could play this. I'm gonna write the fastest double bass and these crazy little parts here, and yeah, he's got it. And I'm always like, oh God, geez, I got to really woodshed on this. I got to go to school to teach myself your programming. And so I think that's sometimes what happens. If somebody knows they're gonna work with me, they set the bar very high, you know, and I gotta match that bar. So I always like it when the drums are programmed really, really well, because it's like, man, I see what your vision is. If you've programmed these drums as well as you have, that means you have a definite mindset of how you want to hear these drums. If you're really detailed, again, there are guys that are like, hey, the drums on the demos, those are just a basic template. I'm just telling you where the kick and the snare hits. You do everything else. There's those, I like those. But I really like when they have it all just mapped out for themselves. That means their vision, they know exactly what they want. A drum machine isn't gonna work on the record. They've gotta get a real drum feel in there. So I'm pretty good at emulating drum machine patterns that sound like there's 3 legs going on or 4 arms. I can like, wow, that you could tell there. I gotta figure out a way to have 4 arms on this part, 3 legs, but I'll do it. And for instance, a couple of years ago, and the album was released late in 2019, I did an album for Brian Beller from Death Clock and the Aristocrats and Steve Vai, Joe Satriani. He played with all of them, but he's my Death Clock bassist. And he was like, I've got a couple of songs in mind on my record. I programmed them, and I programmed them with you in mind. And his programming was so amazing and just killer and so tasty that there was no room for Gene to do some Gene-isms, which is fine with me. I wanted to play the programming that he had already, and that's always fun, you know? That's like a challenge. Somebody like, here's a puzzle, you figure it out, and then you put the piece, you know, you retrofit it to make it so you can play this. And I followed his programming like as spot on close as I could. And like we've mentioned, you and I, Phil, like if I'm gonna learn a part from, say, a Sean Reinert, or if I'm gonna play a Neil Peart kind of a Rush song or something, you wanna learn those parts as closely as they were recorded, because you have to really serve the creation behind those parts. You can't come in and just like, oh, I'm just gonna slap some of my kind of feel on it. No, there's lots of songs where you get to do that. A song from, say, a Sean or a Neil or any of the, you know, true amazing drummers, you want to give that song the best service that you can. Don't create your own stuff. You want to play it as close to the album as you can. So that's one way of expressing your own, you know, it is creative, because you're like, I had to learn this, you know, this was a test, and I want to pass this test with flying colors. I want to get an A+ on this test. So I will learn your drum programming, or the song that was recorded on Human, or, you know, YYZ from Rush, that kind of thing. I want to learn those just note for note.
speaking of Sean, recently there was a clinic put up on YouTube that he did in 1997, I guess.
Cool.
Yeah. And it's probably the only one he did.
Sure.
And he said something that I'm a big believer of for many years now. There's a saying, as a musician, you have to do what's right for the song. And usually that goes hand in hand with this saying like, less is more, which I'm not a huge fan of, to be honest. Usually what is right for the song can be super many notes if the song asks for that, if it's a chop song, a performance song, and if you underplay it, probably it doesn't work.
Fair enough.
How do you decide what kind of car you should drive for a song?
That's fun. That is very many times for me is determined by who I'm doing the song for, who the writer of the song is, what their vision for the song is. Like, for instance, like with Testament, Eric Peterson has a very definitive way that he wants the drums played, and playing them in a symbolic style or even a strapping, or for me like mechanism or even death clock, any of those kind of styles, that would not serve what Eric's vision is. And Eric is the Testament songwriter. So Alex definitely has added great deals of his influence, especially on the latest record. There's 2 songs from Alex on the record, and they're great. But Eric is the definitive Testament sound. So I don't want to do too much crazy Gene stuff just because I can. I want to serve Eric's vision. I want to, and that's why the drums in Testament, they're in their, kind of, there's a box that they are in. You don't want to go too crazy because I want to serve Eric's. And Eric, I'll let Eric write tons of fills. Like he'll tell me, I want the fill to go, things like that. It's like, okay, because that's what his riff is doing. It's like, okay, I'll do the fill you just told me, as opposed to, just creating something that I think, ooh, that might be even cooler. Eric might be like, I hear this. This is how I hear it, and this is how I want it. It's like, well, it's your song. I want to help you out with it. So that's where, with Testament, for instance, less is more. Just keep it real solid, real, recognizable.
Recording the follow-up to Human, which has to be at least as good, if not a better record than Human, you had kind of a problem, I would say. You had to do your homework to get on par with that record in your own style. So the first track is Overactive Imagination. It's totally crazy. I can't play that shit.
Okay.
That song is like all over the place, super tasty, crazy patterns, and the whole structure is weird. And how was writing that particular track?
That one came pretty simple. I've referred to many times over the years as the adorable little riff tape that Chuck had sent. It was 2 ghetto blasters. He would play guitar into 1 ghetto blaster, then he would press play on that ghetto blaster and then play guitar into the 2nd ghetto blaster, and then he would have 2 tracks, little harmonies and things like that. I really just followed the riffs on songs like Overactive Imagination. The riffs kind of played themselves, and I was like, I'll just come up with a cool little kick-ass little pattern that follows the riff, and that's pretty much all I would try to do. There was no programming on any of it. There was only just 2 guitars on a ghetto blaster. So it gave me free rein to just, find the pulses of riffs and find the high point of a riff, that's going to be a snare or something, or the little accents. The riffs were well accented, and we spent about 3 weeks on the Individual Thought Patterns record of rehearsing it and stuff like that. And I was like, wow, look at this, we did all this in 3 weeks. Now I find that adorable, getting 3 weeks to work on a record. Sometimes I get the days in the studio to work on the record, that's it. But having 3 weeks to rehearse it, and so after we'd come up with the songs, and I'd lay all my parts down, and Chuck was always like, "Man, I'm cool with everything you're playing. I got my riffs over the top. You just keep doing what you're doing." And I would just lay in bed at night before I'd go to sleep, and I'd review the songs in my head, and I'd just, I'd sit there and I'd just sleep, and I'd tap my toes with everything and come up with little fills and stuff. There's a fill, and lots of Neil Peart on individual thought patterns, lots of fills from him. Just try to come up overnight. If you could do it mentally, you can do it physically. You come up with a part, and then the next day you apply that part that you came up with, and what might have been one beat yesterday, overnight you came up with something a little tastier, a little cooler. You got the little something cool at the end. That's kind of how I worked on both Death records that I was on. But I mean, talk about a slamming opener, flattening of emotions, just coming out, just it's like I didn't even consider Overactive to be anything like flattening, because flattening was just relentless. The double basses going from one speed to another speed, and then down here, and then doing that thing that they do, and then Shaman just killed it. So we just tried to make as just a cool a follow-up as we could. Like I admit when Chuck and I were discussing individual, I was thinking that our two minds were going to create this just ball-crushing death metal album. After Human, it's like, I'm going to bring some power too, and I can play like that. Here, I get to play like that, like Sean's drumming on Human. So, I was coming from Dark Angel, a little more simplistic. I was more of a guitar player in Dark Angel. The drums became such a backseat thing. By Time Does Not Heal, the drums were secondary. The riffs that I was playing, I had to write and play the riffs on the record, a lot of them. That was my concentration and focus for Dark Angel. The last album I did was Time Does Not Heal. And so I got to be a drummer. I didn't have to do, Chuck handled all the riff writing, he handled all the lyrics and all the press and all that stuff. All I had to do was be a drummer. So I always consider my entrance into death, my death era, as that's when I became a drummer. I didn't have all these ancillary things I had to concentrate on, the biz, the press, the workings of keeping a band together. It was just, you get to play drums and that's it. So that's where I got to lay a lot of focus on my parts and what I'm going to do. And we didn't try to emulate anything off Human. Like I said, when I heard that Adorable riff tape, I was rather surprised at the non-brutality that Chuck was entering, because the tape that he sent me, the majority of the riffs were all up high on the guitar. And so I remember the first day we picked me up from the airport, we stopped to grab a bite to eat, and then over dinner I was like, hey Chuck, one thing that's going to help me out is if you teach me all your riffs, and that's going to really help me figure out where these pulse points are, where the accents should be, and that's, I'll know exactly what's happening, and I'll play to a lot of those tiny little accents that might be in I'll do double bass flutter when the riff goes, I'll do things like that. And when we went back to his place and he's showing me all the riffs, I was like, okay, they're all so high. There's not a lot of like signature heavy death kind of things happening. So I was like, hey Chuck, you ever thought of like trying this riff like down here and like getting this pretty heavy thing going? And he was like, it never occurred to me. Hey, great idea. I like it down there. That sounds pretty cool. I wrote it up here. I wasn't even thinking down there, but that's cool. So it was helpful for all of us. It's just me learning those riffs, and then us transposing it and creating like just a darker, evil, not all high kind of sound. So there you go.
When I do drum talks, I'm always confronted with a situation I'm absolutely not prepared for, like this room here.
Sure, yeah.
And you get all your stuff in here. I mean, it's like pretty crowded.
Yeah, it's tiny.
I don't have
room.
Space to move.
Fair enough.
You have this kind of very tasty wallpaper there.
Tasty. Tastes like honey.
Yeah, exactly. So usually I have a very tiny window of time to make it happen. So my approach is always do the best you can right here, right now. Do you sometimes miss that feeling of uncertainty making music? Like, do you have that still? Like this, wow, right into the cold water?
There have been moments of that. Like I can kind of equate what you're saying to certain like live situations. Yeah, for instance, with Testament, when I came, like, I guess, back into Testament in 2011, it was a matter of Chuck had reached out to me. We had done the Dark Roots of Earth record. That was kind of a quick situation. Chuck had called me up and said, hey, we've got a deadline, we got to get this album done. And Paul, who was drumming for him, Paul Bostaff, he was injured at the time. He had a serious injury going on, and that was taking quite a while to heal. So Chuck was like, we got to move forward, so we're calling you. Might you have any time available in 2 weeks? And I was just going on a Fear Factory tour, which ended up being my last, which was exactly 2 weeks. So it was going to be a matter of me getting home and driving up to the Bay Area the next day after the tour and spending some time working on the songs there. And I ended up getting the material finally, like, on the last show. So I didn't have much of a chance to go over anything. So on the drive up, I went over the material in the car. It was a 10-hour drive. So I just played the demo that Eric had programmed. We did the record kind of that way. It was like, throw yourself into the cold water and just keep jamming. When it came to doing live stuff with them, we hadn't discussed, like, hey, why don't you join the band? Nothing like that. They went on the road with Anthrax and Death Angel, and they had John Tempesta as their drummer. Chuck had called me up, said, hey, Johnny T has to leave the tour for about 2 weeks. We're just checking in with you first to see if maybe you might have some time available in this little window, and would you be interested? And I was like, I checked my schedule. It's like, I have that time available. This is kind of months away. And I was already contracted to do the Viking album, and that was the 4 or 5 days directly before the tour. I flew from Fort Wayne to Dallas. Well, actually, I'd gotten 2 completely different set lists. Chuck had sent me one, like, here's the songs that we want you to play. I'm like, got it. So I was listening to those, and then Eric and I got in touch with each other, like, days before the show and the first show, and I might have already been in Fort Wayne at the time, and Eric's like, wait, that's not our set list at all. What? This is our set list. So I'd taken the time to put all these songs in my head, and then just a couple of days before, it's like, those aren't the songs you want, these are the ones you do, and I'm in the middle of tracking a record. So I'm putting all my concentration into this album, doing the same thing I do every night. I finish tracking, I take those songs in my head back to the hotel or wherever I'm at, and I go over those songs all night. I come back in, and then I'll really take them. That's how I just get it done in the studio. It was pretty much the 2.5-hour plane flight from Fort Wayne down to Dallas, where I had to learn the material. It's like I was vaguely familiar with a lot of it. It had been a long time since I had been focusing on Testament. Demonic was 20 years earlier, something like that, 15 years earlier, something. But they had told me going into it, they're like, we're going to get a really long sound check. We're going to get to go over like 8, it was a 17 song set or something like that. They were playing for like an hour and 15 minutes or something. We're going to get a big sound check. We're going to get to go over a lot of the songs, so no problem. We got to go over one song. So live that night was our first rehearsal. And so I just crammed them like crazy up till the show. And we fortunately had no shutdowns, no breakdowns. And they had a couple of technical songs in the set list, like a song that we're playing tonight, a song called The Persecuted Don't Forget, Persecuted Won't Forget. That has like this middle section that is the most tech thing I think Testament's ever done, and Paul's playing was great on it. So that was the most challenging thing, but that's where you get thrown into that cold water, man. You better learn how to swim or you're gonna sink, and you really just try to maintain a calm. That's where the calm comes from. You're put into this incredible situation, challenging situation, and it's really up to your own fortitude to just go, I'm going to be okay. I'm going to get this. It's fine. It's just music, like it's just entertainment, folks, like Dev used to say. So you're going to get it. So just go into that with some confidence that you know what you're doing. You're going to pull this off, and that's really helpful. Your confidence in yourself. If you go into something going, oh man, I'm going to blow it, I'm going to blow it, I'm going to blow it, that is the worst thing you could do to yourself. Just go in going, I got this. You don't know how it's going to end up, but if you're going into it with your own confidence in yourself, you know that it's going to, you assume everything's going to be okay at the end, Nobody's going to die if you miss the beginning of a song, it's going to be okay. So there you go. You try not to take it too seriously. Take it seriously enough that you do your job well, but if something unexpected happens, you're going to be okay.
Speaking of Devin, have you seen the episode I did with him, with your input?
Oh, that's fun. No, I haven't. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, I remember you reaching out.
Let's say my favorite part was when you read through my questions and you were already talking about Almost Again, and I just practiced to it recently.
Nice.
And you said that Almost Again was basically your song for him, but it was like a song of love.
Absolutely.
So can you please give me that input again, because Absolutely. I liked it so much.
Yeah, man. Well, we had one song left to write for The New Black, and Devin had to hit the road. He was taking the DTB with Opeth, so he was going to be gone for 6 weeks on an Opeth tour, and he's like, this is my last song, and no drums on it. And he's like, this is the last one, so, come up with something cool. Here's the only guidance he gave me was that he wanted it to just be, I think I came up with the term grotesquely beautiful for it, but it's a very pretty song. And he's like, I just want the drums so intense. I want just that absolute juxtaposition. You have free reign, and that was just my love for Devin. I worked for 6 weeks writing it, every day, getting down to the studio, coming up with cool beats that matched what was happening. And that was absolutely my love for Devin. That was a love song on drums for my friend Devin, so that was cool. And when he got back and he heard it, he was just like, that's precisely what I was looking for. That's the way I heard it in my head. Something just so different, the riffs are all pretty and the melodies are all pretty and the drums are just, that's what I was hoping for. So it all worked out well in the end.
Was that the usual, right? That he was like, there's the riff, do something. It was probably more ideas for drums already in his head, because he's pretty good at.
He was good at programming, absolutely. And he would program, and his programming was so good, it really fit what was happening, that I just had to genize a couple of spots here and there, but for the most part, Devin had a really good idea of what he was looking for on the drums, and he was able to lay those down in the programming. And this was even dates back to '96 when we were doing the City album together. We had rehearsed like one day, and he gave me the tape at the end of the rehearsal saying, I've got pretty much the whole album on demo right here, and just check it out and see what you think. Everything that he programmed on it was killer. I'm like, I want to play this. And there were a couple of things on the demo. I remember Home Nucleonics from City, that in the chorus there was one beat that I couldn't hit on the kick and do the, I couldn't do that on kicks yet. So it was like snare. So I instead of doing the kicks on the demo, I did a snare there, and it actually just kind of worked out a little better for the snap of that chorus. But that was about the only thing where I was like, oh damn, I don't know how to play that. And I do remember, and this is something I'll freely admit, I remember we were recording the song Triple A, And that's kind of a slow song. It's kind of in the 160 sort of BPMs. And at that time, I was just so fast, double bass fast, that there's a part in the middle of the song where the double kicks are going. I could not play that. I could not play it. I could do all the fast stuff, but doing something at that tempo, my legs like, what the hell? And it might have only been on the day that I was recording it. Like, sometimes that happens. You just don't have the chops on that day. Sometimes you get a few days to track your album. So if I don't have it on the Wednesday, I'll take it again on the Saturday, and we'll get it then. I recorded all of City in one day. You know, it took 13 hours to record. We recorded 13 tracks, and 6 of them didn't even make the record or something. You know, something crazy. I just didn't have the legs on it that day. So Devin was like, hey, dude, I know you got this. Tell you what, let's just have you go, and I'll just create the kicks for you, you know, and that's what we did. You know, I'll admit to that. That's how we use technology. It's like, didn't have my chops that day, but that taught me so much for the future. Always have your chops together for everything. Don't let them create a kick pattern that you can't play that day. Make sure you can play everything. So, you know, every album after that, you know, that was such a learning experience for me. We played that song live a million times. I had it every time, but just that day I didn't have it. Make sure you have it every single day. You've got your chops together. If there's something that you don't expect to be a challenge, I was not expecting those kicks to be a challenge whatsoever. That sounds really easy to do. So that was just such a shock, such a surprise. And then it's like, don't worry about it, we'll just fix them in the mix. I was like, oh, well, okay. And I just never want that experience ever again. So every album after that is me playing the piss out of everything, from strapping to everything else. Fear Factory, that mechanized record, that's me fucking playing it. They grid that shit all the time, which is that's your approach. That's what I understand it. I get it. But that's me playing that. That's nobody faking kicks, or I refuse to have that happen, because you never know what song you're going to end up playing live. When I'm preparing for a project that has some pretty intense drums, am I listening to Neil Peart or somebody? Am I listening to somebody else? No, I listen to my old stuff. You know, it's like my wife is like, only Hoglan listens to Hoglan as an influence, as an inspiration. But really, it's just like, it's just the thing of, I did it once, you know, I could do that again. You know, this album's calling for intense double bass, or this show is calling for intense double bass, and I did it then, so you could do it now. And it doesn't matter if I'm 30 years older, you better get better every year. You know, I'm 52 now. I better be a better player than I was at 22, you know, like, that's just a given. You know, I think every musician who's been doing this for 30 years, you better be at the top of your game in your 50s. I don't subscribe to the fact like, well, I wrote that 30 years ago, I can't play like that anymore. No, you should be able to play it even easier now, because then it was a challenge. Now you've been doing this for 30 years. You've got the chops. It's got to be easier. That's the way I feel about things. So.
Talking about the struggles, are there still things that you can't do and you actually don't know why that is? I mean, my left foot is faster than my right foot for whatever reason. Maybe muscular things.
Sure.
That you use your one muscle more because it's your main foot and you abused it for way too long, so the left foot is still cool.
Fair enough.
Do you have similar things like that?
There were things like that in my past, like directly. For instance, there's a song on my first record. I was 18 when I recorded it, and that was Darkness Descends from Dark Angel. There is a song on there called Death is Certain, Life is Not, and it's just let me see. For those who aren't familiar with it, the beat is essentially a downbeat. Snare on the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and double bass going through it. And I wanted the entire song to be non-stop double bass through the whole song. I couldn't do it. I was 18 and I was trying, and I just did not have the stamina. I did not have the sense of how to do this, but which I developed a little after that. So I broke it up into a bunch of patterns, instead of going all the way through. It's like, whatever the pattern is. As a matter of fact, it was Sean Reiner that came to me, like when we were doing a Death to All tour together. He was playing some songs, I was playing some songs. He came up to me, he's like, dude, that song, Death is Certain, that was a genre changer. That was a game changer. Like, nobody had ever written double bass patterns before. You created the double bass pattern. I was like, I never thought of that. That was my shortcoming. I couldn't do what I wanted to do. And Sean's like, that was great. That changed the game for all of us. And I'm like, cool. Yeah, all right, cool. And that was just me not being able to do something, but it was a happy accident that I wasn't able to. So it was after that where the drums became 90% mental, 10% physical, and that 90% of mental is me telling myself, I can do this. Whatever the part's calling for, hauling double bass for a long time, or patterns that are kind of nutty and kooky. I pretty much wrote my own patterns after that, because it was like, I just went back to Darkness Descends. I went back to Death is Certain, where it's like, okay, you did it there. It was okay. You can create patterns for other things, just because you can't go blah, 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 for 5 minutes straight. It's okay in the future to do some choppy sort of things. And that ended up, in other people's words, kind of altering the course of some drums for our style of music. So yay me, all right, that was an accident. But I tell myself all the time, I can do this. That's why I go back and listen to my own stuff before I'm, because you did it then, you can do it now, I can do this. That's my biggest mental situation when it comes to drumming, is just telling myself, you can do this, and sometimes that is like, you have 24 hours of flying time to get to Europe to do a clinic, and the day you land is the day of the clinic. You've got no sleep, and you still have a 90-minute clinic to be up and entertain everybody and really be on. And yes, you do rely on a little bit of the natural adrenaline that comes when you're placed into a situation like that. That is very helpful. But there's all sorts of situations that are very challenging, but the audience doesn't need to know any of the challenges that you've gone through to make this moment right here happen. So that's all behind the curtain. It doesn't matter to the audience that I flew all night and got no sleep and all that. They paid their money. They want to see it done well. And it's like, that's your responsibility, to yourself more than anybody. But I take that responsibility seriously.
To another plan. Living without regret. Pay the price with my death. You better give up again.
Hey guys, thanks for sticking with me through this whole conversation. We hope it was informative. It was definitely entertaining for me. Thank you for all your support of myself. Thank you for supporting Drum Talk. This, keep on coming back, because that helps all us drummers out, and we all enjoy being a part of this channel here. So definitely, keep your support up for it, because that's how a lot of us get to really step outside of our general discussion levels when we get to come on Drum Talk. So we love doing this. So keep your support up. Thank you very much for all your support for me and all of my projects. And I hope to see you all on the road really soon. Definitely here in 2020. Right on.
Thank you so much, Dean.
Awesome, Phil. Thank you.
Cool.